Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's April 16, 2019, and this is episode 657. Today I bring you a chat between two old friends. I sat down with Ibarionex Perello, with no manuscript and no overall objectives except for mentioning Ibarionex's new book, and we just talked for an hour. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that you do too. I do have to apologise for the lateness of this episode, essentially missing a week, as it became obvious that my web server was no longer keeping up with the website, and the next level of server with my old provider was too expensive. So after 10 years, I spent the last week migrating to a new server in a different company. And then all of the fine-tuning that has been necessary to get things running again has taken me the entire week. If you came by the website and saw everything in a mess or completely down, sorry about that. But the new site should be better and faster and ready to take us to the next level, so I think it was worth it. Finally today though, I was able to make the time to sit down and edit the audio that I recorded with Ibarionex just over a week ago, and so I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. For links to the various things that we talk about, and also to check out a gallery of Ibarionex's beautiful work, go to mbp.ac/657. Ibarionex, it's absolutely amazing and wonderful to be speaking with you again. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I always enjoy talking to you. I mean, we've been through a lot together.
Absolutely.
Even though we talk intermittently, but we were as terms of podcasters who talk on photography, there's a few of us who are still around.
I know we're almost like fossils these days, but it's great that we are obviously we've been around a while. We've been doing this. I think I was one of the first, and you were very, very quickly after I saw your amazing show pop up in iTunes, and it's been a long time. It's 14 years now, isn't it?
Yeah, 13 for me. I think I came on about 6 months after you, something like that.
Maybe so, the beginning of 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. So it's a long time. Dedication for you there on both of our parts. But I think it's been pretty enabling. We've both grown from what we started. We're going to have an open discussion today. I've got a copy of your beautiful new book here, Making Photographs, and we'll talk about this as well. But just to continue this podcasting theme for a moment, when you started your podcast, did you expect it to take you the places that it has? What were your feelings about that?
When I came up with the idea, I was in my car, I was driving home, and the idea of a podcast came up because I was listening to podcasts, and I thought, it'd be a good idea to have a show where photographers talk about photography, not about equipment.
Mm.
And when the name popped into my head, it was like a Candid Frame. Oh, that's a great name.
Mm.
And something in my gut told me that if I do it, it'll be successful.
Mm.
I didn't define what that success would be. I had no idea what would result from it, but I just knew that if I created it, there would be people who would listen to it.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the extent of it. What it's provided me over the last 13 and a half years, I don't think I ever really could have imagined it back then. If I had known that it would have led to any variety of different opportunities in terms of me writing books and traveling all over the country and into different countries as a direct result of the show.
Yeah.
No, and just the fact that I've gotten to meet so many people. Some of whom are my photographic heroes.
Yeah. You've interviewed them all, really, haven't you?
Oh, I wish I'd. Even though I got I'll have 500 by the end of the year, it's still not enough, right? Because there's so many people on that list. I gave up counting how many people are on my list. But if if I had the means to do it like twice a week,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
still
yeah.
wouldn't be able to get to everyone that I want to get to.
Wow, that's amazing that you've still got so many that you still want
Oh
to talk
yeah.
to. Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. Of course, yours is one of the few podcasts that I still subscribe to, and that's kind of a good thing because obviously it means that I'm still interested in what you're saying, but
Yeah.
it's kind of a bad thing in that, podcasts are, for me at the moment, aren't quite, although I'm obviously hoping that people listen to mine and yours, and because I no longer commute. I used to listen to them avidly when I
Oh
commuted,
yeah.
but now my commute is one flight of stairs up to my office, so I don't have the same time to listen to podcasts that I used to. So for me,
I'm in the same boat.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of contradictory, isn't it? But but I still love doing mine. I'm going to be putting this out next week. I've got another chat that I did now that I've finished my winter tour at Travelogues. I've been having a few chats with people. I spoke with a guy yesterday, Jeff Brown, and this will be old news for the people who listen to this next week. But really, a very clever guy from the UK. He's basically a LinkedIn and social media expert. So I had a great chat with him yesterday, and I've got a whole bunch of stuff lined up. And 14 years on, I still enjoy doing this every week.
Yeah. And, and I think people who listen to our shows hear that.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope so.
Because there's so many shows that are out there, so much to choose from. I think that at least the shows I kind of gravitate to, most of which are not photography podcasts at this point, but it's often in terms of what I get in terms of the person who's doing the show. And sometimes it's the content, but to a large extent, when I hear somebody who's really enjoying whatever they're talking about, that means something. So I'm glad that the both of us have been able to sustain that after 14 years, because this is the longest stint that I've ever done anything.
I know what you mean. I know what you
and
mean.
Just the fact that I'm still as enthusiastic as I was at the beginning is unusual, but I'm very grateful for it at the same time.
Yeah. On what you just said, I've had people email me and say that, I know that most people, including myself, hate the sound of our own voice.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
And I often cringe at that. But I have people email me say that they listen to me and kind of sometimes with an apology, but to go to sleep.
I've heard exactly the same thing.
And it's like, with your voice, you've got such a great voice, and I envy you so much with that. But actually, on that, were you in radio or anything at any time? Did you ever?
No.
It's just your voice, and you use it as it is.
Well, I stuttered when I was a kid, and I had to work really hard to get rid of the stutter. But in high school, I got into theater, so I acted in high school theater. And then I was in speech competitions in junior high school and during my first couple of years at junior college. Yeah, but I never did anything like radio until I started podcasting.
Yeah. I think I had someone email me once saying that he could tell that I've gotten over a stutter. And I actually didn't stutter as such, although I sometimes search for words. And now, because Japanese is really my first language. I speak English like when we're talking things like this, but it's so seldom now that Japanese is almost my first language. And so sometimes I'm looking for words, but I do find that occasionally what happens is my voice sort of drops out and I can be talking. And normally in an hour's conversation, it will happen once or twice. It's as though my voice just disappears. And I think that is probably part of a stutter, or it's something that probably was very close to becoming a problem for me. So I can appreciate that as well.
Yeah, I notice it happening when I'm nervous.
Yeah.
If I'm nervous, then the stutter comes back, and basically how I taught myself to get rid of the stutter was just to slow down.
Yeah.
my what is it? My mind was faster than my mouth, or my mouth was faster than my head, or one of
Mm.
the, or vice, one of those two.
Yeah, yeah,
And it was just like took my time to just sort of slow down,
yeah.
and because I'm not a rap. If I start talking rapidly, my mouth is just tumbling all over
Me
itself.
too. Yeah. I was talking with Jeff yesterday, and after the conversation, I'm still debating whether to include this in the show or not. But we got into talking about the fact that he was saying he was dyslexic, and
Mm,
at school we had very similar problems. But both back in England, he's a couple of years younger than me, but almost the same age. And I'm pretty sure, I've never actually been diagnosed, but I'm pretty sure that to a degree I'm dyslexic. And I think that for me as well was part of what defined how I was my education. But
hmm
also we got onto the subject, and we're way off the rails here, but this is fine. Um, we got onto the subject of how I'm a terrible reader, as in I read really slowly. I listen a lot easier, and I think most people probably do. But an interesting thing that came out of our conversation yesterday was that I actually found it really easy to learn the 2,136 or whatever it is characters that are in daily use in Japan. Because they're pictographs, and some of them, like the character for a river, looks like running water. And he was saying that a lot of dyslexics are better with words that look more like pictures. You see things in pictures, and so it makes so much sense that I was able to pick up and teach myself like literally 2,000 Japanese characters in just 2 years, when that's normally a whole school life for a Japanese kid. So it all sort of comes around. So the stutters and probably a bit of mild dyslexia, it all comes
Yeah,
around. So yeah.
yeah. Because for me, I was diagnosed last year with first ADHD,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which was really a surprise to me. But also the guy who I'm working with now suspects I also suffer from major depressive disorder.
yeah,
So I've always dealt with depression and anxiety all of my life, but
yeah.
the ADHD was sort of a new thing,
Ah,
and understanding and dealing with both with counseling and medication has helped tremendously.
wow.
But it's amazing how we end up adapting and sort of compensating in ways that we don't even know consciously to get
Mm,
through our lives.
yeah, yeah.
And it's not always necessarily a bad thing, because it results in us. Um, it leads us to things that end up really benefiting our lives at the same time. And I think that that's part of the reason I always gravitated to photography, was that it allowed me a way to express myself non-verbally.
Mm. I know what you
Yeah,
mean. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's a very important thing for me too. And to jump into this, one of the first things that I saw in your book was right there in the literally as soon as you open it, during the introduction. I'm just going to read this, and
Mhm.
that's a terrible thing for a dyslexic person to do, if that's true. But so you start with, in the introduction, I believe the thing that makes it difficult to improve your photography is the ease with which you're able to make photographs. Raise the camera to your eye, press the button, and there you have it, a photograph. And you go on to talk in this introduction about how you believe that the simplicity of making photographs is part of the problem, and you have a really good example of, if you can within moments you can make a photograph, but if you want to pick up a guitar, you can literally not make anything beautiful. You say that you
Mhm.
probably only your mother would think of it as music, but it's so true. I mean, most other pursuits we have to practice it for so long and put so much time in. Um, and I have to tell the listeners that although I'm picking out phrases from your book here, I still haven't read it cover to cover. I've been way too busy to do this, and I hate the fact that I'm talking with you now without having read it, because I'm very much looking forward to completely absorbing this beautiful book. But I find that, that's so true, that first statement. And I'd love to know how you go on to talk about, this as a progression. Where do you take this in the book?
The reason I wrote the book was because when I was teaching, one of the things I often experienced was I would do my lectures, we would go out in the field, and as we're walking back, every time someone would say, I don't think I got anything good.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we would sit down and we start looking at the photographs, without exception, each person produced a photograph that I thought was really good.
Mm.
And I realized it was a sort of a disconnect that was happening for most people in terms of taking a picture and being able to recognize what they had done, and more importantly, recognizing the things that they had done well.
Yeah.
And it was only during the critique session that I was able to point out all these things that they were doing. And I think part of that is that as people, we have come to know what a good photograph looks like.
Yeah.
Because we look at pictures all the time.
Yeah.
The problem is lacking the vocabulary and the basic understanding of what makes up a good photograph when it comes to our own images. Just because we're so sort of close to it. And I wanted to create a book that bridges that gap.
Yeah.
That would allow people to have a basic understanding of how you are seeing as an individual, and how you can use that when you're making photographs and then evaluating the photographs later. Because we take pictures so automatically now, whether it's with our phone or with our camera, that there is not necessarily a conscious awareness of what you're reacting to and why.
Yeah.
And so I broke down the book into visual elements to begin with, and they're light and shadow, line and shape, color and gesture. Principles that people have heard about all the time, but more often than not, what I would see is that people would learn something about one thing, but would never create this sort of synergistic relationship between all the other elements. So they would learn something about light and shadow, and so they would fixate on light and shadow, but they weren't paying attention to their composition. They weren't paying attention to line and shape. They weren't noticing that something that's really bright in the background is a distracting element. And they would only discover that when someone else pointed it out.
Yeah.
And so people would experience an inconsistency with their ability to make good photographs. And as a result of that, especially if you're photographing a lot, you get frustrated. You start doubting yourself. You start feeling that I'm not really talented, especially when you start comparing yourself to other photographers. And what I wanted to do with the book is to teach people is that you have a unique way of experiencing and seeing the world. And I just want to give you the basic tools so that you can start making sense of why you're responding to everything you're seeing in that way. And then that would allow you to make informed decisions about how to use all those elements when you make a composition, to the point, hopefully, it will become an instinctual thing that happens like in the background in your head.
Yeah.
So to the point where you're not going, oh, okay, here's light and shadow and line and shape. You do that when you're first starting. But as you practice and you shoot and you shoot and you shoot, all of that stuff just becomes a reflex. And what you're doing is you're looking at that frame and you're saying, okay, what do I include? What do I exclude in the frame? When's exactly the moment that I need to anticipate and capture? And I think that's the bridge that I think many people who own cameras are never able to reach. Because as you said, quoting me from the book, it's so easy to make a photograph that you don't necessarily have to work very hard. And if you're satisfied with making the occasional good photograph, there's no need to have this kind of understanding.
Yeah.
But I think for a certain percentage of us out there, we really pine to make photographs as good as the people that we admire. And so it has to be informed practice. It's informed practice that gets you there.
Yeah.
not just producing a lot of photographs, because God knows all of us can, have terabytes and terabytes of bad photographs.
Mhm.
It's not just the quantity; it's the quality with which you pursue making your best photographs.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a few pages in, you mentioned that um, it's, if you shoot a lot, everybody's going to be lucky enough to get a few good photographs, but it's
Hmm.
really more about becoming consistent. And I think a deeper understanding is definitely what we need to be able to consistently make good photographs. And I think what you mentioned earlier as well is really important. The fact that people will often, straight after a shoot, they will think that they haven't got anything good. I think that our anxiety as photographers and our our desire to make, especially once you're into it more, you're deeper into it. People have a much stronger desire to make a good photograph, whether it's just from your own sensibilities and your own sense that you want to make something that is more fulfilling to yourself, or whether it's because you want to impress your friends at the camera club. It's, the motivation may be different for all of us, but I think people start to get to a point where, after a while, where you really desire that, making a really good photograph, and that can be kind of paralyzing. And I think that I had
Yeah.
one lady on my tour this year. She sent me some images last week that are absolutely beautiful, and they were of dancing cranes. We'd been to the crane center. She'd got these beautiful photos of dancing cranes, and yet when I did my walk around the bus with my mic at the end of the tour, she said, well, the only thing I'm disappointed in is that we didn't get any dancing cranes. And she'd gotten home and she'd got a camera. I mean, some of them, she said they were far away. She had to crop them quite heavily.
Hmm.
But she'd actually photographed a whole bunch of dancing cranes, and they were beautiful photographs. And so I think that what it was that she'd got this idea that she wanted to get a certain type of photograph, and she didn't have the memory of it because it wasn't exactly what she
Hmm.
wanted. And
Yeah.
I often find, I did a post a while ago, I forget exactly which one it was, but I I talked about analysis paralysis, using that term, but it was more about, for me, not filling my head with other people's photographs before I go to a location. I
Hmm.
remember the first time I went uh, to Iceland and Landmannalauga. That's a beautiful, or Lugar. It's a beautiful valley that is absolutely, there's these rhyolite mountains and the absolutely beautiful colors. And I didn't even know until I walked into that valley what I was going to photograph, because I didn't look it up. I went with a very talented, he's now working all over the world, Tim Vollmer, a German photographer who does amazing trips. I went with him, and he basically just led us to all of these amazing places as a group. And so I turn up at this place, and I've said ever since that place, geographically or geologically, it's not that high, but I think
Hmm.
it's one of the closest places to heaven on earth, and
Wow.
it is absolutely beautiful. But I turned up there, and I had no prior experience. I've never seen it before. I'd never seen photographs of it, and so I was completely open to my own creativity. And I came away with, I went 4 years in a row, and I still think that my first year was the best photographs from there. And I kind of think it was just because I'd got no preconceptions. I walked up, I saw it, and I photographed it how I wanted to. And I think that is so important for people to do, to be open. And I think that this lady perhaps had a head full of dancing crane photos, which hers weren't. But then when she got
Hmm.
away from the experience, and she put a little bit of time between her and her photographs, she went back and looked and realized that she actually had some really very, very nice dancing crane photos.
Yeah.
So it's strange how we do that. We have these preconceptions and things.
Well, it's completely logical that we do, because we learn from seeing other people's photographs.
Yes, yes.
We whether it's landscape and wildlife like you do, or street and travel like I do, there are countless images in our head that we've looked at, that we've admired, and so we model ourselves after to that.
Yeah.
And that's good to a great degree, because you learn so much as a result. But there comes a time where you have to stop mimicking that work. And part of what you're talking about is sort of that pivot point.
Yeah.
Because when you go in with an expectation, you're not going with an expectation of an original image and scene that comes out from somewhere from you. You're modeling that idea based on something that you've seen somebody else do.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And when you get locked into, I got to get this shot, and it has to be this, all you're doing is attempting to try and copy someone else, and then you blind yourself to all the other possibilities that are out there.
Yeah.
And I think that getting comfortable with that idea of walking out with a blank slate, with no expectation, and being completely open to whatever reveals itself, is the only way that you'll get to the point where you'll create images that are unique to you, and the way you see and the way you experience a moment.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to be out there with a group of 12 photographers side by side, all making the same image. I mean, you see those things all the time, and it's like, everybody's making, the same photograph.
Yeah.
And they may process it a little differently, but there's, it's just glorified Xeroxing. and some people are really happy just to do that. They made a pretty picture that looks like something they saw a professional photographer do, and for them that's great. And I'm not bad mouthing people for whom that is fun. They enjoy doing that.
Yeah.
But for people who listen to my show, or probably your show, I suspect that they're all aspiring to discover their own voice, their own sense of talent, and you have to understand that this is part of the process, is that you're going to have to sort of let go of those preconceptions.
Yeah.
And as much as you, especially in the kind of work that you do, where you're going to photograph a particular subject or a location at a time of year, having an understanding of what you can likely expect is important, because you got to figure out when you're going to go there and all that other stuff. But once you get there, then you got to let go of all that stuff and just see what gets revealed to you. And until you're able to do that, I think that you can only get so far as a creative.
Yeah. I think that what happens with some people, probably with a lot of people, is that they have, obviously, if you're going to pay thousands of dollars to go to a location, you're going to want to maximize your productivity. And so they will go online and look at where they're going. And some people, and I've done this for places where I'm going alone. I absolutely do this. I'll go on to like 500px or something. I'll look and I'll try and find some examples, and I'll maybe even copy a bunch of those to Evernote or something, just to give me some visual clues as to what the place looks like and what I can expect, as you say. The great thing for me, for a number of trips, is actually that I was given opportunities. It was the same with Iceland and Namibia. I was given opportunities to go and work with some amazing photographers and guides that took me on the first trip. And with most of them, it was multiple trips, but that freed me from having to do any research before I went. When I first walked into, I know that there's a lot of photos of dead flay in Namibia out there now, but I still think that place is absolutely beautiful, and it's where you have the orange dunes behind the silhouetted, the almost fossilized or petrified camel thorn trees. they're beautiful photographs. And I walked into that valley without, I must have probably seen the old National Geographic photo years ago that started off the dead flay sort of boom, if you like. But I walked into that valley without any real sort of graphical or visual clues as to what I was even going to photograph. I didn't research it at all. And so, I mean, it turns out that I photographed, out of all of the trees that are there, I photographed the same, slightly obviously different composition, but I photographed the same tree or couple of trees that were in the iconic dead flay photo. So I was kind of pleased that I found that, because it made me realize that I was finding the same forms that attracted, and I should look up his name, but there's a very famous photo from dead flay from National Geographic. So I was happy that I found the same form, and I photographed it in my own way. But at the end of the day, it was a very similar photo to what had already been shot thousands and thousands of times. But to me, my image was totally original, because I was completely unaware of what everyone else had done. I'm not going to try and sell it as such, because obviously it's not. But the fact that I was able to do that just came from this fortunate situation where I was going to be led to a place and didn't even have to look up anything about it. But what people tend to do is, obviously, you're paying to get to a place. A lot of people, if it's their first trip with me, they don't know how much I'm going to actually be feeding them directly. Like, I don't want to say spoon feeding, but I literally take people to exactly the right place at the right time. And they don't always know that. So I'm sure a lot of people are going online and they're checking out the images. I sell my tours with my own imagery, so they've at least got the photographs that are on my website in mind. And so that sort of, it sets up the expectations, and then expectations can often be dashed, and the anxiety then kicks in, and we're into this situation that we're talking about. So from your experience, do you find that people are going in with the hope of creating a photograph that they may have seen on your site, and that they're measuring how successful the trip is by whether or not they got that kind of shot? I think for some people, at least, yes. And that's kind of natural. That's got to be human nature. They're expecting to at least get some of the images. It's obviously the images that I use to market trips they're accumulated over multiple trips. So they might not get every single opportunity, but we still, like my dancing cranes in the snow, it doesn't snow at the cranes every time we go. Some years we don't get any snow, like this year. There's snow on the ground, but falling snow is not that common. And so if people want the falling snow dancing cranes, that took me 7 or 8 years to get my shot, and I haven't shot that same photo since. But it's on the tour page. So that sort of thing could be difficult for people to accept mentally as they're shooting. But the reality is that the rest of the photos that you can get there are still beautiful, and that's what I think this lady did recently, in that she got back and realized that she actually did have a whole bunch of beautiful dancing crane shots. But maybe
I can see people looking at you and going, "I paid you a lot of money. Why didn't you make it snow?"
Yeah. Yeah. That time, I mean, this is one of the things, and this is kind of me blowing my own horn about the trips as well. That time when we did get the cranes dancing in the snow, we were scheduled to be in a completely different place that day. But because it snowed and because we hadn't get any, we were so close that we could go back. And so we went back there before moving on. And so having the ability to do that rather than working on a very rigid schedule or
Hmm.
itinerary is also one of the benefits of traveling there with me. But that's me turning on my marketing hat, and so
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I know for me personally, I don't go out with an agenda for the most part. Even when I'm going to a location that I've never been to before, I try to put that all aside.
mm,
And I accept the fact that I may not come away with a great photograph while I'm there. And for me, that's very freeing. But I can understand how other people, especially if this is like a once in a lifetime trip,
mm,
where where they really measure measure the entire experience based on that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I find that if I sort of embrace the idea that I may or may not come back with a definitive trip, but image, but if I've challenged myself, that for
mm,
me is much more important. If I can take a look at the photographs that I created and see myself pushing beyond what my perceived limits are,
yeah,
moving past my comfort zone, taking risks.
mm,
That for me is much more important
yeah,
than whether or not I got the photograph. Because when I'm doing that, I know I'm moving in a different direction
yeah,
and that eventually that will pay off. Because
absolutely.
otherwise, I could just go out and make the same picture that I know I'm adept at making over and over and over again
Mm,
and have people fawn over it and go, oh, this is just a wonderful photograph. But inside, I know I could pull this out of my butt at any time, you know?
yeah,
But
uh,
I'll never be able to get to a level of, of seeing and picture taking that I admire so much from photographers who are just, whose work I just am in awe of.
mm,
And so I think that as much as people, and this is for people who are interested in studying with someone or taking a trip or a workshop,
mm,
really take into consideration that it's more about the experience
mm,
and pushing yourself
mm,
than it is about getting a trophy
mm.
image.
I think.
That
Sorry.
no, I just because I think if you're able to get beyond that way of thinking,
Mm,
where you think that there's only one thing by which you can measure something, you open yourself up to so much, including just the experience of just being out there. Because
yeah.
you go to some amazing locations, and I can
Mm,
imagine there have been days where you haven't got anything,
mm,
but you had an amazing chance to be out there in nature
mm,
on a beautiful day with amazing light.
mm,
And if you're fixated on getting this shot,
mm.
there's no way you can appreciate the blessing that you have just being there.
Yeah, I mean, in general, we do come away with trips with lots and lots of images. I think the main thing. I mean, I had over 300 photos from each trip this year that I would consider maybe not portfolio class, but they're all at least in my final selects, which means that
Mhm.
they're um, better than your, to me, my average photo. But I think it's more the expectation, like as we're saying, that people do appreciate the cultural aspects and the fact that they're in this amazing place. And I think that a part of it with my, especially my wildlife trip, and David Duchemin, our mutual friend, mentioned this after traveling with me on the first trip. He said something like Martin really marches his troops, and it's actually a very taxing trip because some days we're up at 3:30, 4 o'clock, um,
Yeah.
and and on those days we're still out until the sun goes down to do other stuff, and so it's actually physically quite a taxing trip. Thankfully, I give people options. I have to be at every shoot, but the guests don't always. So some people do choose to stay in bed on some mornings when they start to get over fatigued. But I think that part of the problem, and I don't want to go on too much about this particular thing, but part of the problem is that when you're tired, you're generally less, or you're more pessimistic about your possible outcome. Just the fatigue
Hmm.
itself and working in the conditions that we're in. Luckily, people do tend to either whether they're taking on board the techniques that I'm talking about and learning new stuff, or whether they're already at a point where they understand all of the things that I would be teaching them about. A lot of that is automatic, and we start to get to an autopilot sort of state. And so luckily they are doing this, they're doing the work, they're being creative. And I think it just takes a little bit less fatigue and a more relaxed frame of mind to sit down and look at your images and say, oh, actually, you know what? I did get it. And that's beautiful. And I'm really happy now. So I've found that.
Yeah, because there's something instinctual that happens.
Yeah.
And when you just let that go, it's amazing what you're able to create. And I love those surprises.
Yeah, yeah. Do you ever go back to work from previous years and things and find hidden gems, or do you generally not?
I went through. I've been documenting downtown Los Angeles for about 25 years, and when I first started, I was working at Nikon.
Yeah.
And so part of that job involved me having to use equipment all the time.
Yeah.
And I just started gravitating to downtown Los Angeles, and I would go out there with an F3 or an F4 or N90 with loads of Kodachrome.
Yeah.
64 and 200. And they encouraged us to shoot a lot because they wanted us to have an understanding of the cameras and the systems so we could answer questions. And they paid for all the film and processing. So It was just like I would just grab half a brick of Kodachrome and I would go out and shoot. And then eventually, as digital came in, I started shooting digitally. But I've been meaning to go through all that work and basically create an edit of 25 years worth of work.
Yeah.
And in late last year, I got all the Kodachrome out, and I went to a friend's workplace, and he had two large light banks.
Yeah.
And I spent like 6 hours, 2 days, 3 hours over 6 hours over 2 days.
Yeah.
Just going through them. Yeah. And I had procrastinated for a very long time at doing that because I was fearing, oh my God, I'm going to go back and it's going to be all crap, right?
Yeah.
And I really was surprised because back then I would shoot, I would look at them, and then I put them in the slide box.
Yeah.
And then I put them away.
Yeah.
There were only a handful that I ever made prints from because I had to do Cibachrome prints, which are very expensive. There was I didn't have access to scanning technology when I was first shooting this, so I could scan them and print them on an inkjet. I was so when I looked through these pictures, there were, I edited it down to about, I think, 92, 96 pictures. But there were about, I would say, 5 pictures in there that completely surprised me because they were sophisticated compositions or moments that I wasn't conscious of how good they were at the time that I shot them.
Yeah.
And it was only now that I was able to look at it and go, oh my God, that's a great shot.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something about this sort of part of our brain that just is able to, despite all the noise, see and create a really good photograph.
Yeah.
And I was really happy and impressed that I did do that.
That's brilliant. That's amazing. So I'm really happy that you did that.
In terms of the older digital stuff, it's sort of, like any time, it's a lot uneven.
Yeah.
Because I had other preoccupations. But I think over the last 5 or 7 years, I've been much more conscious about my own process, largely because I've been writing all these books and these about seeing and especially teaching, doing a lot more teaching. So it's made me that much more conscious of my process. So I can see an arc or a transformation in my work over these past 7 years that I can't really say was that I was completely aware of for most of my time as a photographer.
That's really interesting. It reminds me. I wrote a column and then a blog post where I went into this as well about the mental checklist, and I I basically had a similar experience. You're just saying, teaching, and you're using your experiences for your books and things. So, for me, what happened was, coming back to how we started this conversation, was the podcast. I because your podcasts are conversations with people. You're not necessarily trying to teach people about photography directly, and so but for me, that's exactly what it was about. A lot of my posts are about trying to share my experiences in photography, and what I learned from things, in the hope that it'll help others. And I found very quickly that after, within the first few months or a year or so of doing the podcast, that my own photography was improving much faster, because I was going through, what I was doing was I was creating the podcast that I would talk about maybe in a few days' time while I shot, while I was in the field.
Oh, okay.
And so that's what it started to do. Was I found myself running through a mental checklist where I was asking myself all of the questions. I was trying to answer the questions that I would talk about in the podcast as I was shooting. And I feel that, so people might think, okay, so I have to make a podcast before I can improve. And that's not the case, because you can force yourself to ask these questions if you have no other goals with your photography other than making good photographs. It's really a case of stepping back and just setting yourself up in a situation where you start to ask the questions that will lead you to better photographs. And that was kind of what the mental checklist was all about.
Right.
And then it came around to that, again, feeding back into this conversation, that there comes a point when it sort of disappears into the background and the autopilot kicks in, and we just do things like you were saying about the line and the shape, light and shadow. All of these things become much more natural to us, and you don't necessarily think about it. Another thing that I have just thought about there, though, is occasionally I do find that because I don't shoot like day in, day out, I will go on trips, and sometimes it's been a few weeks or maybe a few months since I've really tried to be creative with the camera. And then occasionally something will drop out, and I'll realize that I'm shooting a snow monkey with a blob of white snow in exactly the wrong place. And I have to catch that again. When you're doing it every day, when you're really practicing something day in, day out, that does become more second nature. But I find that it occasionally, when it's been a while, I will drop back. And so that, to me, shows the importance of being with a camera, having a camera in your hand as often as possible. And I think that is something that a lot of people, if you only ever photograph on trips, like where maybe you'll do one or two a year, there's too much scope to get rusty between the trips. Do you shoot regularly? I mean, are you out pretty much like every week, or?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but I want to get back to something you just said. In terms of one of the things that I do especially in the workshops is that when because one of the things I don't want to do is I don't want to be pontificating on everybody's pictures, right? Because for me, saying what I think is good about the photograph is just sort of one opinion.
Yeah.
But by breaking it down into light and shadow, line and shape, color and gesture, that's what I talk about over and over again.
Yeah.
That at some point I tell my students, I'm not saying a damn thing about these photographs. You are. Right? And we just go through every time an image comes on the screen, it's like, okay, let's hear it. And it's not about, I like this picture. No, we're not talking about whether you like it or not. Yeah. What's happening with light and shadow, line and shape, color. And by the end of it, I've sort of drummed it into them that this is how you sort of evaluate your pictures and other people's pictures. Yeah. And because I completely agree that you need to shoot a lot in order to get that understanding. But even if you're not shooting every day, understanding how to look at photographs provides you so many lessons. So whether you're looking at pictures on Instagram or on a computer or in a book, if you're looking at them based on those things, you understand what those photographers are doing right.
Yeah.
For me personally, the more I go out and photograph, the better I've become.
Yeah.
But I'll qualify that by saying that I don't shoot as many pictures as I used to.
Yeah.
So I think that's sort of key for me, because now I don't have the luxury of being able to shoot for hours every day. That's just not the reality. But I always have my camera with me until I dropped it last week and I got to send it in for repair.
Oh dear.
Jesus. But I shot with my camera phone yesterday. But I'm constantly have a camera with me because I'm always practicing seeing.
Yeah.
And that for me is much more important. Even if I go out to run errands, I have my camera with me, and if I only dedicate 10 to 15 minutes of that day to actively seeing and making a photograph, that's fine. And then when I get 3 hours to go out and photograph something, all the better. And when I go on a vacation and I have the luxury of 2 weeks, even better. Yeah. But I don't isolate my opportunities for creativity based on some event.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
And for me, the result has been is because I'm learning to see with much more care, and especially during the most mundane times of my day, I make those surprising discoveries.
Yeah.
Because I'm observing light and shadow, line and shape, color and gesture, and I see stuff and I get excited and I grab it and I make a couple of pictures and post it on Instagram, and it's very satisfying.
Yeah.
But recently my mother-in-law moved in with us.
Yeah.
She's 86.
Oh wow.
And so I don't have the freedom of just leaving anytime I want to, because I have some responsibility for her care.
Yeah.
But what I started doing is I started documenting our life with her.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
And so I'm making photographs of just the different parts of our day when we take her to the doctor or she goes to the salon to get her nails, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that sort of extended itself into a project where I'm photographing families and their morning routines, like on a Saturday or Sunday morning. And I find that having these projects is incredibly satisfying. One, because I'm documenting an important part of my life and these families' lives.
Yeah.
But it's providing me an opportunity to use everything I used as a street photographer in a very different way.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it's like all those surprises, because especially when you're photographing young kids, it's chaos and unpredictability.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Throwing
brilliant.
a dog there and it gets all the more complicated. Right.
Yeah.
But it's exciting just because of the challenge.
Yeah.
And the fact that I'm exercising this muscle in a very, very different way. So sometimes that week, I may only have that one scheduled shoot, and then whatever I can get during the week. But I make as much of that time as I can. And I have to say that I think over the past 6 months that I've made some of the better photographs that I've made in a long time. And I think it's partly because I just took my photography in a different direction that wasn't just exclusively to doing stuff on the street.
Yeah. That's brilliant. That's going to become such I'm sure, a very thought-provoking body of work, and hopefully it won't be hidden in the Ibarionex Perello like stock of photos that the world never sees.
No. I'm sharing some of those on Instagram.
Already? Oh, brilliant. I'll check it out.
Yeah, so some people will see some of those on Instagram, but at some point, I'll do something with the body of work. They're both fairly new projects.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that I have that, because, if I was only shooting when I got a chance to go somewhere and do street photography, it would be very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, writing and all of the stuff that you do, it takes a lot of time. And so I wish that I had more. I started shooting with the EOS R recently, which is much smaller. And so it's It's even the lens, it's the same lens, the 24-105, but it's a smaller version. And so I'm finding that I'm able to throw that over my shoulder more than I ever would with a full 5D with a battery grip. So I'm looking forward to having more of these sort of everyday experiences. But because for me, one of my main things that gets my creative juices flowing is being in the mountains, in the snow and stuff like that, I'm kind of limited. So I envy you for having, I envy you, but I mean, not to the point where I'm going to be running off and doing the same sort of thing. I do enjoy, my wife's father is like 96 or 97 now. So when I go to visit him, I always have a camera and I'll get a few photos. But I do envy you having that situation relatively close where you can form a project out of it. And I think that is, it's like I say, I look forward to seeing that as a body of work, because knowing how you do work and your own sensibilities and things, it's going to be a really nice thing to see.
And I encourage people in the book to just like find stuff in their own home.
Yeah.
Because I think they assume that they have to go elsewhere. And it's like, hey, start paying attention to what the quality of light is at your house or your apartment at different times of day.
Yeah.
Because like you'll discover that there are some wonderful things happening in your own living space that you just don't pay any attention to because it's just a functional space. This is where I sleep. This is where I eat. This is where I live with my partner, where I'm raising my kids, where I'm, playing with my dog. And you don't really think about it in a visual sense. But I've made some of the best pictures over the last 6 months in my kitchen.
Yeah.
With the morning light coming through the window.
Exactly. One of, even now, the photograph that I have on my phone, like, when you lock screen on your phone and the back, is about 6 months ago. In the winter, the angle of the sun being lower, it shines in more, and we had this beautiful light just in our living room, like living dining area, and I had a keyboard, as in a music keyboard on the table with my computer and my headphones, and behind it is just our sideboard thing and the stereo, and then the crockery sort of cabinet. And the light was absolutely beautiful one afternoon, and I'd set it up to just sit down and practice with the keyboard. But my wife turned and says, "What are you doing?" And I'm there sort of crouching over, getting a good angle with my iPhone. And this iPhone shot from 6 months or so ago is one of my favorite images from the home last year. And it was just the light. It was the way it was coming in and the play of the light and everything. And so I can totally relate to that. And that really can be very fulfilling.
And if you can recognize moments like that under the most ordinary circumstances, when it presents itself in the real world in a really dramatic way, you not only see it and recognize it for what it is, but you know what to do because you've been working with your camera to the point that okay, let me close my aperture down, let me adjust the exposure, let me set the white balance correctly, and it just becomes a thing that you do in milliseconds, and then you focus your attention where it needs to be on how you're seeing and how you capture it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Ibarionex, we've been talking for almost an hour now, and I know that I haven't gone back into your book, but to save your time as well as trying to avoid making this too long, what I'd love to do is just find out where people can go to get your book. So making photographs, developing a personal visual workflow. Where is it available? At Amazon, everywhere?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon and probably Barnes and Noble, and depending on where you are in the world, in some bookstores. I know that it's all throughout the U.S. and Canada, and I think it may be in UK. But otherwise, people can either get a soft copy through the places that you mentioned, but there's also you can get the ebook. And if people order it through the Rocky Nook website, which is rockynook.com, and they order the book there, and they can use the promo code Perello40. That's PERELLO 40, and the numeral 40. Yeah, and they'll get I think it's a 40% discount off either the ebook, the softcover, or both, or something along
Excellent.
those lines.
So what was the URL for that again?
It's rockynook.com.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send you the URL for it. Rocky Nook is the publisher of the book.
I see. Cool stuff. Okay, well that's very generous of you. I'll include that in the show notes, and hopefully people will enjoy it. I know I'm going to, as soon as I've figured out my PayPal issues and everything else that's prevented me from reading before we spoke today. I'm really looking forward to diving in and devouring the rest of the book. But Ibarionex, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to talk again today, and I do look forward to getting a chance to do so again at some point before too long. But thank you. And
no, my pleasure. And real quickly, I just want to let your listeners know is that I'm hoping to put together. I have put together a trip for Tokyo.
Oh, brilliant!
With George Nabechi, who's been doing workshops with Arthur Morrison and Sam Abel.
Yeah.
So we're just announcing it. So I'll give you the link for that. So if people want to have like a personal experience of Tokyo and all the those areas, George is from Japan.
Yeah.
And so he's going to give all of us a really personal experience of the city. We're not just going to be hitting the typical tourist spots.
Brilliant.
So if people are interested in studying with me and doing it in Tokyo, check it out, and hope to see some of you guys there.
Well, I will hopefully get a chance to finally meet you in person as well then, because I know that we missed it. I came over to see you in LA when I was there, and we ended up so close and yet and didn't manage to get to
right
shake
across
hands.
the street from each other. Yeah. It is such a shame.
but definitely, I mean, we'll have to hook up when you're here. When is that?
That's sometime in December. First 2 weeks in December.
Of this year. Excellent.
This year. Yeah.
That's brilliant. I'll be in town, so we'll have to hook up and finally get to meet. But thanks for that. And of course, there's also the Candid Frame. Is your podcast is still on thecandidframe.com? It's still
candidframe.com. Yeah, they can just go there, and we have an app that's available so they can download and access the entire archive. Just because of the number of episodes that I have, they're only not all of them are available on the iTunes store.
Yeah.
I don't know about some of the other services, but if you want to go back, as some people do, all the way back to episode 1, they can get the app. There's a link on the website, and then they can search and download and listen to as much as they can muster.
Excellent. Well, that is it. Must be one of the best archives of interviews that there is available on the planet. So definitely people should go over there. And I will, of course, I'll put in links to all of this stuff in the show notes for this episode. So really, though, thank you so much, Ibarionex. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to speak again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you. That was a great conversation with Ibarionex, and as I say, I have put links to everything into a blog post for this episode at mbp.ac/657, so please do go over and take a look. If I can make the time, I'll try to release a second podcast this week, but I do have a whole bunch of stuff on, so if it turns out that we completely missed last week, sorry about that. Either way though, thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share a link with your friends. Subscribe in iTunes or your favorite podcast program to ensure uninterrupted delivery. If you have a moment to rate the podcast or leave us a review in iTunes, that helps to keep us relevant in the huge number of podcasts out there now. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, etc., and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back either in a few days or next week with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye-bye.